All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is our 2021 season finale, our Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. Normally we would have been last week, but because of Extension Conference, we've moved out a week. So we're here in November and, looking forward to fall weather moving in and potentially seeing some frost this weekend. We'll be wrapping up the season today with some current issues on plant diseases and insect pests. I'll have a Plant These Instead feature where we'll talk about options for fall color other than burning bush, and finish out with some Extension Master Gardener program announcements. And just want to let everybody know to be able to look out. We will be sending out our evaluation survey very soon, and it will give you an opportunity to share feedback on this season as well as suggestions for next year. So we look forward to hearing from you through that survey, letting us know what you'd like to learn about next year and what you thought about this year. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Matt and Mike to tell us about current issues. I will stop my share so you can start sharing. And I'm not sure who was going to go first, but forward to hearing what's going on.
All right, I am going to go first. Oops. And let me just say, it's kind of nice that we had the delay here because today falls, of course, many people are aware now of Mexican Dia de Muertos, right? Day of the Dead. And that's November 2nd, or growing up here, we knew it as All Souls Day. And I just thought it would be nice to remember a couple of people as we start here. So let me see here. Of course, we lost Dave Stephan this year, and that was a big loss as a friend and an entomologist, as a general naturalist. And of course, I remember often Dr. Larry Grand, who was one of the folks that I worked for when I first came back from Mexico, from having lived there. My wife is from there, and we lived there 6 years. And when I first came back, he was my first boss here coming back, a mycologist and a wonderful person. So just keeping them in mind today, and of course, anyone who you may have in mind as well. My first mystery question is this. Now, this is not a current photo. This is back in May. And you may say, well, it's a rototiller, and that is correct. That is my rototiller. But what are the things that are wrapped up there in the tines and on the axle? Let me get my annotation here. So can you see the mouse there? Oh, have I lost people? Hold on.
We can see it, Mike. We can see it.
So at the house we now live in, we moved in July of last year, and I worked up this one area that we're using for a vegetable garden, and the tiller tines were tore up. Well, not tore up, they were fine, but they were wrapped up with these things that look like roots. Does anybody know? Let me see if I can see the chat here. That's always a challenge for me, is to see the chat when I'm presenting, when I'm screen sharing, but let's see if I can figure out how to do that.
Most people
We'll keep an eye on it.
Saying roots. Yeah, most people are saying roots. We got vines, roots from one of those nasty climbing vines. We've got root knot nematode, root rot nematodes.
Okay, neither root knot nematode nor vines nor roots. But because the shape is like a root, that's where the name rhizomorph comes from. So these are actually rhizomorphs of a fungus called Desarmillaria tabescens. Now you're going to ask, how did I know what species it was from these structures here? Well, I couldn't have told you exactly at the time, but now getting to a more recent photo in that area, earlier this month, these clusters of kind of light brown, we call them honey mushrooms, popped up all over what had been the roots of I think it was a sweet gum tree. It was cut down, according to the neighbor, the fall before we moved in. And so there's a lot of this fungus that was in that stump and in these roots of the tree. And it's rhizomorphs, so it's a structure that grows through the soil, kind of a tough, well, not kind of tough, it's very tough. You try and break them, it's harder to break than a root. So that's how we know what it is. Now, I didn't realize that I was moving into an experimental laboratory for armillaria, because we've got this row of, as you can see there, the crepe myrtles. On the other side of that fence, there's a Sasanqua camellia that we planted, and there's some other shrubs and things in the backyard here, kind of a naturalish area. But we will see what happens to these when, as time goes on, whether this is going to be actually causing disease and death in the shrubs in the yard, or if it's just being a saprophyte here decaying the old stumps. So we think about it often as something causing disease, but well, we'll find out over the next few years. And the Desarmillaria, you probably know it as Armillaria tabescens, and I didn't look up the reasons for it being moved into a new genus, but we've always known that it was a little different because it's the one that does not have a ring on the stipe, on the stem of it. The other species of Armillaria, you have a ring there. How about this one? Now I see where to see the chat. Any ideas of this? Now this also in the neighborhood here, I'll call it the new neighborhood. And I didn't realize until recently walking around how many silver maples there are. And I saw a lot of dieback in this particular one and took a picture just to use it as an example of the symptom called dieback. But then I saw what was going on. So let me look at the chat here and see. Oh, all I see is that Debbie Dillon got rhizomorphs right. Let's see. Does anyone have an idea of what's going on with this particular silver maple? Lightning, not a bad thought. Maple wilt, I'm not sure. I've never heard that particular term. Maybe you're thinking of verticillium wilt. That's a disease that's got a lot of press, but we just don't see it that often in North Carolina. All right, so no other takers here. So let me show another picture, zoom in a little bit here. You can see this large swelling on this branch here that's completely dead. But there's another clue here. Soil compaction. It's good to always be thinking about the soil, that's for sure. I think we've got a culprit actually in the picture. Yes, Charlotte, mistletoe. And I believe that's what's actually causing the problem here. Let me zoom in a little more. That's the same photograph. It's a little grainy because I just enlarged it. But there are clusters of mistletoe in this tree with branch swellings associated. Phoradendron leucocarpus, meaning white fruited, is the species that we have in our area. As far as I know, it's the only species in our area. And we see it a lot in oaks, of course, where it doesn't really do damage, at least not appreciable like this. But we've had several cases where maples have shown significant injury. So this case here in the neighborhood of a silver maple, we also have a sample that came into the clinic a few years ago, Japanese maple that came from Sampson County with, again, swellings and the mistletoe coming out of them. And we've seen this, I've seen it on campus here, even on red maple, where there'll be a swelling on the trunk or a main stem and the mistletoe shoots coming out of it. So on maples, you definitely have the possibility of mistletoe causing some damage. How about this? Here's another mystery. This was, okay, turning the clock back a little bit. This was an ash tree that our, at the time, campus arborist brought in, and he was looking for emerald ash borer damage. But he saw these structures on it and wondered what they were. So Does anybody have a thought on what these might be? So if Matt's not talking about them, that's your clue as you can discount critters. All right, let's see. Oh, Charlotte, you're too good. Yes, these are in fact mistletoe seeds. So we tweeted about this actually in January, and of course the seeds are in the fruits, which are eaten by birds, and they have this sticky material on them. I'm not clear on how often it's the fact that the birds are defecating and how often they're just cleaning their beaks and the seeds stick to the tree stems like this. So this is happening way up in the branches, and really nothing you can do. So I intentionally overlooked the question of how do you prevent mistletoe damage, because I really don't know a way unless you were preventing all birds from visiting your trees, other than of course pruning out. If you do see individual branches that are dying and not the main stem, you can of course prune those out. But other than that, there's really nothing that I know of that you can do. So just be aware that it can cause this damage. Now, as severe as that tree was affected there in the neighborhood, I don't know how you would go about it other than some really severe pruning and hope for the best. All right. Oops. So this one's not mistletoe. All right, just changing actual topics here. Sample that came in from Orange County this month. And the question I first pose is, where should you look for the problem here? These are eastern red cedars, and there were a number of trees that were affected. Some of them, I think, up to or maybe even above 10 inches in diameter. And so the question is, where would you suspect a problem here when you see this kind of just general thinning out and dieback? Okay, the trunk, and of course the roots. So you want to look at both of those areas. So the base of the trunk is definitely where the action was in this case. Now you wouldn't necessarily know that at first because you want to consider roots as well and soil and site issues. But in this case, and oh no, I've got some more pictures here of the that were sent in by the consultant, in this case, the arborist. So you see the thinning there. And in fact, they did look at the base of the trunk. Not probably the greatest job of excavating there, getting between the bark and the wood to look for the mycelium of armillaria, which is usually what we're looking for because we don't have those mushrooms most of the year. And we don't even always have them in the fall if the tree is infected. But here it probably would have been good to get a little bit more of exposure of the wood to look for that thin mat of cream colored fungal mycelium. That helps us diagnose armillaria. But what they did send in was really helpful, and that was this. So the few pieces of bark there's a little bit of fungal material, not enough really to convict for armillaria, but we would have wanted to see more anyway. But the other piece there on the left, that is a polypore fungus, a fruiting body. So we know it's some kind of a wood decayer. The question is it a lion that actually killed the tree, or is it just a buzzard that moved in on the dead wood? And in this case, I'm pretty convinced, I may run this by our macrofungi expert, Dr. Mark Corbetta, but I am pretty convinced that this is in fact, oh, here's a closer up picture of the, sorry, I didn't get this in the foreground, but you can see the pores there on the underside where the spores are released from. But I am pretty convinced that this thing is, and there's a better picture of it from bugwood, a fungus we call Heterobasidion. Now, the root rot that's caused by this, and you can see it fruiting on a stump, that's a typical place for it, right down there at the base, often getting bits of pine needles or other litter trapped in the developing fruiting body. A long time ago, it was called Phomizinosis, and then they realized that it should be moved into a genus, different genus, Heterobasidion. So it was called Heterobasidionosum. That wasn't a problem because we called it a gnosis root rot at the time they did. And so we just say, okay, now it's a nosum root rot. But now we've got a problem because it turns out that that species is a European species. So what we have in our area is probably Heterobasidion irregulare. And now we're not going to change it, I don't think, to irregulare root rot. We'll just have to come up with a name, but Heterobasidion root rot for now. And this is a fungus that attacks a number of hosts in the conifers. The ones that come to mind are pines is the most classic one, but we saw it on Fraser fir within the last 2 years, and fairly large trees. And junipers is where we probably, I would think, in my recollection, we see it most there. In fact, in our old house, I think we may have lost one to this fungus. When you're cutting down a tree, therefore, we want to try and prevent this, because what happens is that, let's say you cut down a perfectly healthy, even pine tree, the spores released from these fruiting bodies will infect that stump. And from there, they work their way down and then through the roots, reaching other susceptible trees nearby. And that can continue to spread that way underground as long as there are susceptible trees in root contact with one another. So the thing that you want to do is, for whatever reason you're cutting down let's say a pine or juniper fir, you want to sprinkle some borax on that cut surface to prevent the airborne spores from infecting that stump. There's another treatment that's used with, it's another wood decay fungus, but one that isn't a pathogen, that you can use to try and get that colonized. I don't know that that's available though really to the public, but borax is, and so that's what you want to do. Once it's under the ground there, I don't know what you would do unless it was some pretty severe action like trenching to prevent those root grafts, but I don't know that even would work. I'm not sure that's been tested. That's something you would do for, let's say, oak wilt, perhaps, to try and break root grafts, but I don't know that it would help in a case like this. The fungus would continue to move. So that is about what you can do to try and prevent this one. We don't see it that often, but occasionally. All right, now that I've learned how to check the box here, chat. Will this root rot spread to the other eastern red cedar roots in the area? What can be done? It potentially could. I wouldn't, if they're in the area, but not actually in the same planting, right? So there wouldn't be root contact. Then I would think that the damage is minimal as long as there's not, a cut stump for it to infect. So those airborne spores are not, to my knowledge, going to infect through intact bark. All right. So that leads us into our bolos. Be on the lookout for the next little while here till we meet again in February. And on our shade trees and shrubs, any time of the year, we could have them show symptoms of Phytophthora and Armillaria root rots. And I've got a picture there of the Armillaria between the bark and the wood on the upper right. Not that they're necessarily that active in the cold months, but you can have the symptoms develop just any time of year. Cercospora leaf spot on privet, because people start noticing their privets when it's one of the few shrubs in the landscape that have leaves still. So that kind of diffuse yellowish spot you see in the lower left. Of course, Entomosporium leaf spot on Indian hawthorn and on any red tip photinias that may be left out there. It's very common throughout the year. And boxwood blight, not only on our boxwood shrubs, but it can be on greenery. So the tips that they cut to try and make wreaths and other holiday decor can actually have boxwood blight on it. Continuing on our trees and shrubs, Rhizosphera needlecast on spruce, usually working its way up from the bottom. Septibasidium felt fungus is going to be evident on our smooth bark trees and shrubs as the leaves are off, and we'll see it on that bark. That's just, again, a fungus that's infecting colonies of scale insects. So it's not doing any harm directly to the tree, but it's a sign that you've got scale insects on that stem. That's the middle picture there, one of the dark versions. There are other types that are lighter brown color. Black knot on plum and black cherry. I don't have a picture of that, but those will also become more obvious when the leaves fall. And wildlife damage. So sacksuckers, you can see some of the damage there on the far right. And if you don't notice it directly on the trunk, you may actually see some yellowing of the foliage from that point upward if it's gone so far as to girdle the tree. And voles, which are of course here all year, but can cause damage there to the roots and are active there under the litter layer. Not too much in the vegetable garden, of course, but on the brassicas, you could get sclerotinia stem rot. You see that in the lower or middle bottom picture, which is, I don't remember, I think that may have been collards. You can see the decay there on one of the petioles and actually the white material of the fungal mycelium there. It's called white rot, excuse me, and the decaying there of the made stem. Black rot, which is a bacterium, Xanthomonas, lower right picture. Typical V-shaped lesions, although it doesn't always show that. That can also occur on our brassicas. There's a white spot disease of turnip, fungal disease, and also Cercospora leaf spot of Swiss chard beet and spinach. So we had a recent sample of that spinach upper right photograph there. Also be on the lookout for your soil test results. Hopefully you've submitted that so you have your liming recommendations if it's been a couple of years since you've done that. And be on the lookout for those winter weeds throughout the season when there's not vegetables in the garden. Always a struggle to figure out how to control the weeds but not have erosion. So I have a particular way that I do that seems to be working. We'll see for this coming year. In the flowers and the perennials, you'll find the last of the rust and the powdery mildews in this month of November. And any plant, of course, could have cold injury from our first frost that we're going to get. On pansies, the black root rot, you want to make sure the roots are good when you're transplanting. Phytophthora root and crown rot, a little bit more obvious, Pythium as well. And also, as we get into the later part of the winter, as things start warming back up again towards spring, we'll probably be seeing some botrytis blight on the pansies. You can see a photograph of that in the lower right. On the ryope, that anthracnose on the tips of the leaves, that's the picture in the upper middle here. And so that's why they get their winter haircut, to reduce the amount of fungus that you'll have carrying over into the spring. But if the whole plant declines, you may have something like a fusarium crown rot or even a Phytophthora crown rot that can occur on this. I think we see fusarium more often. In turf, and again, I'm not the turf expert, but fairy ring could be occurring on any turf grass any time of year. Large patch on warm season turf that's under stress before it goes dormant. You could see a large patch, and a disease called yellow patch on some of the cool season grasses. So that being large patch in the lower left and yellow patch in the lower right. And that's of course fairy ring here. With that, I will try and locate the chat box to see if there were any questions here. Okay. What can you do for black knot on cherry? That's another one of those cases where the only thing that you can really do is, oh yeah, I see Charlotte's already answered, proved it out. Sometimes it's in an accessible area and sometimes it's not. And it's mostly on the most susceptible, it seems, are the plums, but it can get on other prunus species as well. All right, if there are no other questions, I will stop sharing and let Matt take it away.
Thanks, Mike, as always. Hope everyone can hear me. Let's see. All right. Let's talk about some critters.
That's what they wanted to hear about anyway.
No, diseases are great too, especially those fruiting bodies. All right. Is that showing everybody the whole screen?
Now it's looking good. Now it looks good.
Yeah, I was having troubles lately where it only shows part of the screen. Great. Well, hopefully you can see this whole slide. So today I want to talk to you about a group of insects first, and then I'll talk to you about some updates and some bolos. So I want to talk about Orthoptera. So, oh look, Orthoptera. So Orthoptera is an order of insects that includes crickets, grasshoppers, and katydids. So many of them jumping insects. Most are plant feeders, but many are omnivores, and some are actually predators. Now this group is common all around and lays eggs in the ground or on or in plants. Some of them actually can insert their eggs into plant tissue. Others lay them on the surface of plants, while many of them lay eggs in the ground, kind of sticking their abdomen in and laying them there. And many of them produce sounds, basically the males to call females. Now, they are rarely significant pests, although they can consume large quantities of plant material. I will say, of course, there are the occasions like the locust outbreaks, especially on other continents, but sometimes here in the US as well, where huge amounts of locusts, which are basically just a type of grasshopper, will swarm and feed on all different plants in the area. And billions of them can just massively destroy crops. But for the most part, they're kind of minor pests. They just kind of nibble on bits of plants here and there. So typically we don't see them as a huge issue, but they're very common around there in the environment. And as well as being in the environment, some of them actually live in our homes. So just want to tell you about the two major groups. There's this group called the Ensiphera, which just means sword bearer, and the Califera, which means burin bearer. And burin is basically this like a scratching tool. And that's based on their ovipositors of the females. So in many of the sword bearers, they have this long sword-like ovipositor. Again, many of them can use that to insert eggs in the plants, but many of them also just to stick that in the ground and lay eggs. The grasshoppers, this other group, have a very short ovipositor, basically this little very blunt kind of or sharp tipped but very short ovipositor. Also in these the sword bearers, they typically have long thin antennae with many segments, whereas the short-horned, and this is actually why they call them short-horned often, the grasshoppers, they have these short antennae with more compact segments typically. So this group is the crickets, katydids, mole crickets, and bush crickets, and we'll talk about them in a second. And the short-horned ones include the grasshoppers, pygmy grasshoppers, etc. So I was partly inspired to talk about Orthoptera because I went to the park the other day, this past Saturday, with my daughter, and saw this lovely male meadow katydid singing. Actually, I heard it singing, of course, first, and I had my camera with me. So, and other than the kids in the background, hopefully everyone can hear that. But it's this really interesting acoustic behavior that orthopterans have. Now, crickets and katydids and the Ensiphera, the sword bearers, they actually rub their wings together to make sounds. It's not like in the cartoons where they'll rub, Jiminy Cricket rubs his legs together or whatever. And what they do is that they actually send out sound from their wings. It's a file and scraper kind of mechanism where there's pegs that scrape a lot across a membrane, and it causes this vibration, and different species sound different, and we'll hear some of them today. And they're actually picked up on the front legs of the females. So they have actually an ear on their front legs near their elbow, kind of. So if you look at certain crickets and katydids, you can actually see that ear, and the males will have this region on their wings for producing sound. So the first are the crickets, the typical crickets. Some of people buy them for their pets to eat, like the house cricket, Acheta domesticus, which is a European species, but now, of course, everywhere in the pet trade especially. But many times you will see these large black crickets running around in the genus Gryllus, which are called field crickets. And these give you that typical chirping sound that you think of when you think of crickets. Oh, why is it not doing that? So very typical, kind of stereotypical sound of a cricket. Now, there are other types of crickets around, mainly these bush crickets that come in all different forms. You can see actually these two are males. You can see those special kind of regions on their wings that are used to chirp. Females, of course, have these long ovipositors, sword-like ovipositors. But there are a number of different genera that are around. I especially like the red-headed bush cricket or the handsome trig. And these actually have these large expanded palps. Very common in the midsummer or so. You see the nymphs earlier, of course, but they grow throughout the season. And here's a Colombian trig. It's actually native, even though it's called that. But they have this a little bit more, a little different call than the typical field crickets. So a little higher pitched. They're smaller species, and there's a variation between the different species and different genera out there. Some other crickets you may or may not see, depending. Many of these insects are nocturnal or hide during the day, come out at night to sing so that they can hear each other. They don't have to see each other, although many of the meadow katydids and things like that exist out in grasslands during the day and sing during the day. But tree crickets are these very elongate, almost stick-like crickets. And here's a male that's actually producing sounds. Some of them actually chew holes in leaves that help amplify and direct their sounds. They have this much more shrill kind of, they're fairly distinct when you hear them, but they're basically kind of a continuous sound. So very common, you hear it at night. And so that's the tree crickets. Now, a silent cricket, and one you may not see unless you are breaking open ant nests, or I found this one under a paver stone in an ant nest of carpenter ants, are the ant-loving crickets. And these are the world's smallest Orthoptera. Some of them are only a couple millimeters long as adults, and they're completely wingless. They don't sing, and they're only associated with ant nests where they feed on eggs and larvae and steal food from the ants and chew on bits of debris, things like that. So really cute crickets, but obviously you have to look in special places to find them. And if you're an ant colony, they're not the greatest things to have around, although they hide very well, so the ants don't notice them. Now, there are a lot of elongate katydids with this kind of cone-like head in several groups of Conocephalini. So you've got the meadow katydids. These are the ones that are common out during the day, sitting on grass. This is the similar species to the one that I showed singing earlier. And they also have larger cousins that you often actually see in the fall right now, especially the brown ones. But these large Neoconocephalus, which are a few inches long, about 3 inches long, very large katydids. And here's what they sound like. So very shrill, kind of ear piercing. Hopefully you don't have your volume too high up, because very, very, very loud, but also obviously very attractive to their mates. Then you have some of the larger katydids. This is Pterophylla. This is what we would call a true katydid, although all these are technically katydids. And true katydids are very large, have these very large rounded wings. You can see that ovipositor. You can tell this is a female. These are, so a couple inches long, are much more massive and robust than those cone-headed katydids. And then you have these fairly large angle-winged katydids, which have more pointed wings, especially the hind wings that pop out from underneath the front wings. Now, angle-winged katydids are one of the groups that you may commonly see the eggs of. And so this is one of those mysteries that we sometimes get people asking about, but they lay these eggs that look almost like pumpkin seeds or some kind of flattened seed gluing on branches and twigs and on plant surfaces. So if you ever see a row of these kind of flat seed-like eggs that have this microsculpturing on them, that's going to be of one of these angle-winged katydids. And the true katydids, back to the true katydids, they have actually one of the most distinct songs. You often hear them at night in the summer, and this is what they sound like. So if you've ever wondered what this sound was, it's actually one of these large katydids singing out for mates. And I think this is like one of those really prominent summer sounds that I associate with the warm weather. And actually, you can see on this female, she's got those ears on her front legs. Now, another group of silent cricket and katydid relatives are the camel crickets. I know a lot of people get freaked out about these in homes, especially this group. These are non-native Asian type of camel crickets that often live in basements and crawl spaces. Despite their scary appearance, they are completely harmless, and they basically feed on detritus, dead insects, bits of organic matter, things like that. They can jump pretty well, and they look a lot like spiders, but again, they are harmless and can't hurt you. So I kind of just leave them alone. But we do have some native species. If you go out in the woods at night, you may find some of our native species. Again, this group has no wings, so it doesn't sing. They usually have a humpback and really long legs and antennae. Now, mole crickets and pygmy mole crickets are pretty wonderful little critters. A lot of convergent evolution, especially in the true mole crickets and the Grilla talpity. Grilla talpity literally translates into cricket mole, so mole crickets. And you can see they have these front legs. The claws are there, but they're the basal parts, the more basal parts of the legs, the tibia and parts of the tarsus have these large scooping shovel-like structures. And of course, it looks very much like a true mole, and it's convergent evolution so that they can dig around in the soil. Some of these are plant feeders, feeding on plant roots. Others are actually predators of other invertebrates, including other mole crickets. So some are actually beneficial and some are pests, but oftentimes their digging can actually be a pest in golf courses and places like that. But otherwise, people don't often notice them. They can fly and jump and dig, so they've got their triple threat. And then if you're lucky enough, you may see the pygmy mole crickets. And interestingly enough, this group, the true mole crickets, are in the group with the crickets and katydids, but the pygmy mole crickets, you can see those short antennae, are in the group with grasshoppers. And these are often found, they're very tiny, a few millimeters long, found often near the shores of streams where it's sandy especially, and they'll tunnel in and burrow in that soil, leaving trails. Very cute little orthopterans. Now, one of my favorite orthopterans is the Carolina leaf rolling cricket. That's because it's got a number of interesting attributes. It's Camptonotus carolinensis. It is the only member of the family Grillicrididae, which are the raspy crickets in North America. We do have it here. It is a nocturnal species. As you can see, it has no wings, so it does not sing at all. And they actually have these large front legs with these spines. And I'll show you the antennae, which are really, really impressive in a second. But these are nocturnal predators, often of aphids and other soft-bodied insects. So they're actually beneficials. And they often hide during the day. And how they accomplish this, and it's pretty interesting, and people probably don't know this, but they actually can spin silk from their mouth parts and roll up leaves, thus the name. And that's where they hide during the day. So if you didn't know, there are silk-producing crickets out there, which is really interesting, I think. And just to show you, we saw this one, just the antennae hiding under some band we had around the tree to hang up some play equipment. But this is, what it looks like up close. But the antennae are many, many times the length of the body in this group. And so they feel around in the night and can feel things way far away. Just really impressive insects, I think. Now into the Califera. These are the ones with the shorter ovipositors, shorter antennae, but most of what you guys see are the grasshoppers. And there's various types of grasshoppers out there in the family Acrididae. You have these typical ones, and many grasshoppers, even as adults, have shortened wings. So some are full-length wings, some have these medium length, and some have very short wings, depending on the species. So just because it has short wings doesn't mean it's a young, although this is a nymph of one. You can see the wing pads here, and the nymphs eat like the adults do. They eat plants, but they do come in different forms depending on their habitat. So this is a toothpick grasshopper, one of my favorites. You can see this very elongate body structure is really great for hiding among grasses. And then if you get to the sandy areas in the eastern part of the state, you've got these kind of camouflaged white and grayish grasshoppers. They're technically, this is in the group where locusts are. You can often hear these clicking around when they fly a short distance. They'll click their wings, so that you know that it's a grasshopper. And grasshoppers are typically day active, feeding, you know, on the plants. But they also don't often make much sound. But when they do, instead of rubbing their wings together like the katydids and crickets, they actually rub their legs against the side of their body, and their ear is on a different part of the body. I think it's on their abdomen, the base of their abdomen. So a little bit different sound system, much less apt to sing than the other groups, but grasshoppers will make sounds. Now, some of the larger grasshoppers out there are going to be the birdwings, which are these very elongate, large, you know, few inches long grasshoppers, often found in meadows and grasslands. And then if you're on the coast, this is a species in a different family than Acrididae, the Romeliidae, the lubber grasshoppers. So these are common throughout the southeast, especially in the warmer areas. Very large grasshoppers. These are in fact often collected and used for dissecting specimens for biology classes, high school and middle school biology classes. These come in a few different forms, color forms. This is the orange form, and basically most of them have these short wings. Now this species does produce a poison. It'll kind of bleed out chemicals that are there to keep predators from eating them. And finally, if you are near shorelines of waterways or even inland a little bit, you may find the pygmy grasshoppers in the family Tetragidae. And these are characterized by this pronotum, basically the front of the thorax. The top is often crest-shaped, or they have this long produced spine all the way down the back, ridges, things like that cover the wings. And they're often this kind of rock-shaped or look like bits of rock around. So they can be quite difficult to see on shorelines, but very cute little grasshoppers that are in a different family. Okay, are there any questions about grasshoppers and katydids? Okay, I see grasshoppers ate huge holes in my porch screens. How to prevent it? Ooh, that's tough. I've never heard of that happening, but they will chew on all different things. Not sure why they were chewing on it, and I have not heard of that, but I'm not sure. So basically, if you can chew them away or pick them off or something like that, you may be able to put some kind of repellent on there, but I'm not sure exactly. That's a new one to me.
It was new to me too.
Yeah, unfortunate too. You've seen.
I wouldn't have believed it had I not seen it.
Yeah, I mean, they do have very powerful jaws, so I don't doubt that they would easily be able to eat through a screen. They often feed on grasses, which have crystals in them and stuff. So yeah, So there you go. They eat algae on screens too. So yeah, so one thing could be maybe they're tasting something on there, and they just eat random things. They'll many of the species actually, there are very few very specialists. They're mostly going to be feeding on any plants and things that they can chew. So yeah. Growing up, I heard there's a formula to tell the air temperature based on the number of cricket chirps per minute. Is there one that applies? Yes, Mike, there is. It's I think the number of chirps in every in a 15-second interval, and then you add 37, I think. But I have to look that up. It's some equation like that. Now, I did actually try that the other night, and it wasn't so close. But I don't know. It's not an exact thing. But yeah. And when I was young, living in Florida, the large grasshoppers would spit tobacco on you. Can they bite humans if caught? Okay, so yeah, so many of the crickets and especially the grasshoppers will spit out dark fluid, which is basically just the contents of their stomachs they're regurgitating. And obviously that's gross to people and many animals, and it smells bad and whatnot. So that's a good tactic for them to defend themselves. They can bite. Some of the larger katydids can actually bite through the skin, no problem, because again, they can bite through window screens and things like that. So if they've got large mandibles, they can bite. Most of the grasshoppers, especially these little ones, and many of the smaller species don't really bite. They prefer just to jump away or spit out the fluids. But if it is big enough, it can technically bite. So you can hold them kind of near the back end or, by the wings and everything. They can't turn around and bite you or anything. But most of them, I would say, are pretty docile. My daughter even held that ankle wing katydid that I showed you a picture of the other day, and it was perfectly fine. Great. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to some updates. So, Joro spiders, journey to North Carolina. So this is going to be something on people's radar. You're going to get a lot of calls and a lot of questions about this spider because it's big and scary looking, but luckily that's where that ends. So these are a type of orb weaver, Trichonophylla clavata. These are a type of golden silk spider. They are native to East Asia, so Korea, Japan, and that area. They were first found in the US in 2014 in northwestern Georgia, and quickly spread to surrounding areas, including South Carolina, Tennessee, and North Carolina now. They make large golden webs, often high up in trees. And these webs can span 10 to 20 feet. So one of the issues right now is they're creating lots of webbing across paths and places like that in areas where they're in high densities. And they are large spiders, so 2 to 3 inch leg span, so about the size of your hand. They do have one generation per year, so this is why we're seeing them now and hearing about them more now. It's like a lot of the other orb weavers, you really don't see the large mature specimens until the late summer and early fall when they've grown up throughout the year. So right now these spiders are dying out. Their egg sacs are going to survive the winter and then emerge as those spiderlings that you won't see for a long period of time. And then midsummer or so, you start to notice these large spiders. Now, fortunately, even though they're so big and kind of scary looking, they are harmless. So they're basically blind. You can hold them. They're not going to bite. Unless you were to press them up against you and try and squish them, and then there's obvious reasons why they would bite. But they are generally harmless species and are not aggressive at all. So yeah, we do have actually a native species of Trichonophylla. This is the one that people will see on the coast, the golden silk spider. And the Joro spider is in the same genus, but obviously a different species. The golden silk spider is the only native species of Trichonophylla, and that used to be in the genus Nephylla. And you can tell the difference. You can probably see here the differences, everyone. But the ones on the coast are going to, and sometimes these are called banana spiders, both of them. The ones on the coast are going to have these tufts of hair on their legs. They're going to have stripes, but they're not yellow stripes. And they have this kind of uniformly patterned abdomen. The Joro spider, on the other hand, has no tufts of hair, or at least the tufts of hair are very short. They're going to have these yellow banded legs, and they're going to have a striped yellow and bluish and red abdomen. Now, both are functionally very similar, and they're out there. But the Joro spider is interesting in that, again, it was introduced in around Atlanta and has quickly spread to the western part of the state. And because it is able to survive in cooler temperatures and these cooler climates, we suspect, and we'll see how these establish in the western part of the state, but I suspect that these are going to be start to move all over the place and be found in many areas of North Carolina in years to come. So let me, before I do something, okay, so I'm going to go look at the chat real quick. So, okay, I did get the cricket calculation right. Yes, and Sean, those golden silk spiders are huge and scary looking, but I would tell people they're harmless and I think they're very beautiful and impressive animals that deserve our respect. So which spider is larger, Joro or golden silk spider? They're about the same size. They're large individuals are about the size of your hand, which is not great to hear for most people, but they're all both fairly large spiders, and they are actually only a little bit bigger than the black and yellow garden spiders that people commonly see in their gardens as well, which are also another orb weaver. So I just want to ask, have you seen the Joro spider? Now, I think we might have annotations blocked. Charlotte, am I correct? So we might have to, unless people can annotate.
Yeah, I think they are blocked.
Okay, that's fine. Well, if you can say in the chat what county you've seen them in, if you've seen any this year. I have a feeling that next year, if we check in, more people will be seeing them. This spider does not seem to be dying off here in the United States. But I will also say that many of these species that come into the U.S. Often have these big booms. And then after a few years, they begin to kind of peter out, or at least become less noticeable and kind of equilibrate with the environment. So let's see. Okay, so in Florida, so it wouldn't be in Florida. So that would be the golden silk spider. I'm asking specifically about the Joro spider, this one with the yellow banded legs. So yes, in Alamance County. Okay. Haven't seen any in Chatham County. Yep. So and that'd be close to me. I'm looking forward to getting photos of these, but who knows? See them in Extension, Sunny Native Garden, Brunswick County. So I think those are the golden silk spiders, not the Joro spiders. So it says, somebody asks, are these species a pest? I would say only in the nuisance way. And also they will capture and eat prey, of course. So they will be eating things that are around and native. It's hard to say what kind of impact they're actually going to have. But other than being a nuisance and kind of making webbing everywhere, they are basically kind of just there. They're scary looking, like I said, but really are harmless. And then should we try to kill them off because they're exotic? I would say, I guess if you feel good about that, that's fine. But honestly, there's really no stopping them now. They are here to stay, I'm assuming, because they have been here for 7 years and have been spreading. There's basically no chance of eradicating them now. And I imagine unless there was some crazy disease that broke out among them or some kind of climatic thing that killed them off, I have a feeling that they're going to be here forever, just like many species that get brought here accidentally, unfortunately. Okay, so keep an eye out on them, and just so you know that they're out there. And finally, we'll do some bolos. So late fall, winter bolos. So insects will continue to move into homes. The usual suspects are going to be the brown marmorated stink bugs, leaf-footed bugs, and box elder bugs, ladybirds, beetles, and ladybugs. Wasps, the social wasps like the paper wasps and hornets and yellow jackets are looking for overwintering sites, the mated queens, and sometimes some flies like cluster flies and fruit flies. You may still see these little black velvety larvae crawling around on patios or driveways. These are actually the larvae of soldier beetles, and the soldier beetles have been out on the goldenrods and kind of out and active, making babies, and these babies are now running around. They can be a nuisance and abundant in large numbers, but they are predators. They're not a pest of anything. So you can just kind of exclude them, get them out of your house, or just leave them alone and they'll go away. The fall cankerworms. Right, around Thanksgiving is when we're going to see the female and male cankerworms emerging. They, as larvae is in the spring, and they defoliate plants. The larvae are an inchworm that comes in a couple different color forms, and they can be told by they have 2 pairs of prolegs that are full and then one little stubby one. These were feeding in the spring for a few weeks, and when they go to the ground, they pupate and wait until the cooler months, right around now, and they'll be active throughout the winter. The females are weird because they're wingless and crawl up trees to lay eggs after mating with the winged males. And they will lay eggs on all different surfaces. These are from a building on campus. Now, lately, past few years, we haven't heard much issue with them, but every once in a while, there are huge outbreaks of these caterpillars in the spring. There are many winter active insects. So winter crane flies may start coming to your lights. They look like regular crane flies, except they have these antennae that taper and some other characteristics that are a little tough to tell. There's certain stone flies and caddis flies, things like that, aquatic insects that are active in the winter. And you may get springtails like snow fleas, these little tiny springtails that go on the snow and hop around. So, just because it's winter does not mean that all insects are inactive. Some are actually prefer this time of year. You also may be bringing insects into your home when you bring your Christmas trees in. So be careful if you see. It's not really anything to really worry about unless you have like a squirrel or something in there. That would be a little worrisome. But you may see small insects traveling away from or infesting your home after bringing in a Christmas tree. Oftentimes we see giant conifer aphids being the culprit. These are large, very large for aphids, but kind of small for insects. Dark colored, often black aphids with short cornicles. And so you may see these coming off the Christmas trees. When you bring them in, they start to dry out. They're not as suitable for the aphids anymore, and they will move away and kind of infest the house. And not only are some insects preferring the winter, many of them overwinter as adults, especially a lot of flies. And so any warm days in the winter can bring about activity from flies, including blowflies, Drosophilid, vinegar flies, and even some mosquito species that overwinter as adults. Luckily, the Asian tiger mosquito, which is the most aggressive biter in North Carolina, they overwinter as eggs, so you won't really see them waking up and becoming active. But other species of mosquitoes will overwinter as adults, and so can come out and bite any warm days in the winter. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any other questions. Doesn't look like it. And I'll hand it over to Charlotte then.
All right. Thank you, Matt and Mike. Excellent. Get my screen's moved around so I can share. Should be seeing the slide now. You see the plant these instead slide?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Caroline. All right, so our plant these instead feature for the end of the season is going to talk about alternatives for burning bush. So Euonymus alatus, which is a popular shrub, and it's really popular because it gets this amazing red color this time of year, and it's pretty tough and adaptable. It does come to us from Eastern Russia, Japan, China, the Korea, that area, so area that has quite a similar climate to us. So we see a lot of plants from that region do well in our area, but because our climate is similar, they tend to have an advantage in that they're adapted to the climate, but they don't have a lot of pests here, so they can become invasive. And that's one thing we see with burning bush, especially in the Northeast and Midwest and in North Carolina in the western part of the state. And it could self-seed, of course, anywhere in the state. So it is a concern, especially when you're selecting plants to be planted next to natural areas. It does have a seed that's eaten by birds and wildlife, and so they move the seed around, and then it's able to establish, even in forests, kind of open forest areas, fields, meadows, roadsides. So there is some concern about this one being invasive, even though in really urban areas, there's not so much concern because, you know, if you're just surrounded by urban area for many miles, even with birds eating it, they are most likely not going to carry the seed that far. But especially when you're planting next to natural areas, that's when you'd want to be much more selective about what you plant. So we're going to look at some alternatives, some other plants that can give you fall color and don't have the invasive potential. So we're going to look at probably, as far as toughness, one of the most similar would be crepe myrtle. And I know you think, well, crepe myrtle's a tree, not a shrub. And as you see in that top picture, crepe myrtles typically are trees, and they can have amazing fall color. They can be some of the most vibrant fall color, especially in the eastern part of the state. And it's usually not until November or even December before they fully color. But you can see burgundies, reds, orange. Some of the crepe myrtle species, especially those that have a lot of fari in them, tend to have more yellow. But the more recent trend with a lot of these crepe myrtles, or with some of the crepe myrtle breeding, is to introduce dwarf varieties. So there's been a few that have been around a while, like Pocomoke, which you see in the picture, that kind of lavender or that purpley pink. It only gets to be like about 2 to 3 to 4 feet high and wide. So there are some of these dwarf crepe myrtles that you know, have the toughness of the full-size trees, and you get the flowers and you get fall color. So this would be something that could be considered as alternative for burning bush, especially if you're looking for fall color, and you also get the bonus of the summer flowers. There's another older one named Victor, which has a red bloom. Then there's a series called Dazzle, and there are several of these Dazzle varieties, Diamond Dazzle, Cherry Dazzle. So they are all these more compact types. And Bellini is another series so far. I think there's grape and raspberry. So those would be, if you're looking for something really, really tough and compact with fall color and a bonus of summer flowers, look for some of these dwarf crepe myrtles. Now, if you are planting, you know, and you are looking specifically for native plants, I think among our native plants, blueberries actually have some of the most amazing fall color and very reliable in these red tones particularly. We do have at least 17 species of blueberry native to North Carolina, so these are in the genus Vaccinium. They all require acidic soil, so in urban areas where we tend to see higher pH, you would definitely, or anywhere you want to plant blueberry actually, you would definitely want to soil test first to make sure the pH is not over 5. Some of the cultivars can tolerate up to 5.5, but really when we say acidic soil for blueberries, we mean really acidic, like down to 4. They're just happy as they can be when the pH is 4, which is really low for anything else. Even azaleas and camellias and things we typically think of acid loving don't like the pH that low. So we're aiming for 4 to 5, maybe 5.5 for blueberries. So always soil test before planting blueberries. And if you're planting in soils that haven't been amended or improved in North Carolina, you're typically going to find the pH is around 5. Our soils tend to be more acidic unless they've had amendments added to them over the years. But when we talk about all these different blueberries, typically the ones that are going to be the most adaptable and easy to find are what are called rabbit eye varieties. So those are selections of Vaccinium virgatum. This used to be Vaccinium ashii. And there are quite a few varieties. And with blueberries, especially if you're aiming for fruit, you want to choose varieties that were bred or do perform well in North Carolina. They need a certain number of chill hours, the chill hours that we get. And those would be varieties like Premier and Climax and Tiff Blue, Powder Blue, Onslow. There's actually a whole bunch with the names of North Carolina counties. You don't see them quite as much, but some of the nurseries that specialize in blueberries might carry them. So when you see blueberry varieties with those North Carolina county names, those were typically bred, through breeding programs at NC State. So look out for some of those varieties. And typically with rabbit eye, you should plant 2 different named varieties to get best fruit set, but Premier is more self-fruitful. I think you'd still probably see a little bonus by planting more than one variety, and also by planting more than one variety, you can extend the fruit season. So with blueberries, you get amazing fall color, you get fruit. If you don't pick them yourself, the birds and wildlife will certainly enjoy them. And they're just quite an attractive shrub. You get the flowers in the spring as well. And if you live in colder areas like western parts of North Carolina, you could consider planting some of the high bush varieties, the Vaccinium cornbosum, or some of the southern high bush, which are typically hybrids between some of these other species. So blueberries are great for edible landscaping, great for us to eat the fruits, but also beautiful fall color. Some other natives that give us some great fall color, especially in these red shades, would be things like oak leaf hydrangea, which is one for part shade. So it's kind of hard you don't see a lot of fall color in part shade. And oak leaf hydrangea not only will have fall color, it'll also have those lovely white blooms in the summer that will age and kind of turn kind of rosy shades. So you get more than just the fall season of interest. Then Mount Airy Fothergilla, which is sometimes listed as a selection of Fothergilla major, sometimes listed as a hybrid between Fothergilla major and Gardeniae. The main thing compared to Fothergilla major is it's a little more compact. So Mount Airy Fothergilla would be more around 4, maybe 5 feet tall when it's mature, and it will often get those reds, oranges, sometimes even crimson tones for fall color. And it's quite a tough, adaptable shrub that has a reputation of being deer resistant. It will have little white bottlebrush flowers in the spring that smell like honey, but the spring flowers, the general toughness, the fall is really the season of show for Fothergilla. And then we also have Virginia sweetspire, Itea virginica, which is another native shrub. Typically you find it growing in really wet areas, like at the edges of ponds or seepage areas. So it can tolerate very wet conditions. It'll grow at the edge of a pond or in a rain garden. It'll also do fine in just your average soil. It wouldn't be as happy in just a really well-drained sandy site. So you want to go for somewhere that's a little on the wetter side. It does have spring flowers. They usually come out around Mother's Day, and they're lightly fragrant. And just overall, the shrub kind of has this arching habit, which is quite nice. But again, the fall color is the really spectacular season, and this is one deer do like. So if you have a lot of deer pressure, maybe think about more the Fothergilla than the Itea. But if it's growing somewhere that you don't typically see deer damage, this can be a great one for very reliable fall color, and it tends to have these darker maroon colors. There's a lot more plants for fall color you can explore on the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. So listed here, if you set your, go to the Find a Plant feature, and under cultural conditions, you set the size you're looking for. Under the whole plant traits, you say you're looking for a shrub that has deciduous leaves. You can even specify what type of fall color you're looking for. So the link here will show you all of the shrubs that have red to burgundy fall color and meet these parameters, but you could set it to yellow, you could set it to other colors. And there's a lot more things you can explore and find a plant, and you can narrow your search down and set all kinds of features if you're looking for things that are specifically native or to attract a certain type of wildlife or that tolerate a certain challenge. So I encourage you all, this is a great time of the year to plant woody plants, the perfect time, the absolute best time to plant trees and shrubs. As well as just through the winter plan for your garden, plan for next year. Where are areas you're looking for something new to add? The plant toolbox can be your tool for planning and to expand your garden, to choose those plants that are going to thrive on your site conditions. So we are going to wrap up with a few announcements. Let me check really quick to see if there were any questions in the chat. And how hardy are dwarf crepe myrtles? I don't know off the top of my head, but that is something that is included in the plant toolbox. When you go to any of those profiles, it'll list the hardiness zone. So that's information that you can find there. And then Susan had mentioned she had some of the dazzles and they are not very hardy. So typically, yeah, they're probably not going to be as tough as the tree forms because the smaller plants tend to have smaller root systems. Those would be the dazzle crepe myrtles. So they might not be as tough as, say, your larger crepe myrtles. And a couple of comments that you knew dazzles. Let's see. Only had to pull a few new of the dazzles. They weren't too aggressive. And I'm assuming you mean they come up from seed. You can also sometimes, if you nick the roots, they'll come up from little root sprouts. And a comment that Stephanie has a row of rabbit-eye that are beautiful in the fall. Yes, they are. And then dazzles are quite hardy. Okay. All right. Well, we will wrap up with some general announcements, things to know about. First, the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, which is part of NC State University, has not only do they have their standard monthly programs that are online and will continue through the winter, such as their Plant Lovers Tour, which you could attend in person or you can attend online. They have their Midweek with Mark series, the second Wednesdays. They're going to talk a really interesting topic this month is plants to appreciate after rush hour. So plants that really come into their own later in the evening. And then also Gardening 101, which is another one of their online monthly series, the fourth Wednesdays. They're going to talk about herbaceous perennials in November, what to leave for winter interest in wildlife. So lots of great programs, but a special program, and those would be no charge, but a special program coming up this Saturday, November 6th, is Direct Seeding Dynamic Gardens with Bree Arthur. So that one, there is a charge. You can go online and you can register. If you're a member of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, it's actually only $25. But direct seeding, things like poppies and some of these hardy annuals, which is kind of a lost art. She may also be mentioning things like wheat and other things she grows in her garden, if you're familiar with Bree Arthur and some of the amazing things and books she's written to promote just growing food, growing plants, ornamental plants together. That one should be very interesting. So I encourage you to go to the J.C. Ralston website and check out what they have coming up. If you are looking for an adventure, there is a new Extension Gardener International travel study tour planned. This one will visit England and feature the gardens of Southwest England, Devon, and Cornwall. Also go over to the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew and spend a day at the Chelsea Flower Show. So this will be a really exciting one. You can learn more about it. We'll put a link in the chat as well as send a link in our follow-up email where you can go and learn more about this one. And there are some therapeutic horticulture courses coming up. These are online. There is this therapeutic horticulture program development, which is a new, more advanced course. It is a follow-up to the Introduction to Therapeutic Hort, and the Introduction to Therapeutic Hort is a prerequisite. So if you've already done Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture, the Therapeutic Horticulture Program Development would be something that we encourage you to look at and consider registering for. The introduction to therapeutic horticulture will be offered again in the spring, and then the second part, and actually the introduction to therapeutic horticulture is being offered right now, or is just recently wrapped up as well. But the second part, that therapeutic hort program development, will start January 10th. If you have any questions, Christine Bradish is coordinating those courses, so you can contact Christine if you have any questions about either of those. But they are offered in partnership with the North Carolina Botanical Gardens. And just before we wrap up, just wanted to see if there was anything else in the chat. I see a message about J.C. Ralston's Gardening in the South seminar will be February 5th, so that's definitely one to mark your calendars for. They typically have a really great lineup of speakers, and I think that one's usually online at no charge. We'll be looking out for that. And thank you to Caroline. She added the link to the study tour to England and the link for the therapeutic hort classes. All right. So otherwise, yes, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, I realized that I may have confused things a little bit by talking about armillaria as causing root rot and then not being sure how much damage it was going to do in my yard. I would definitely say that it can damage things like arborvitae. We see it a lot in that, and I assume it's that species. Also, rose gets hit pretty hard. I know Matt can speak to that from personal experience. So can my niece. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things develop and on the variety of hosts that are within its reach in my yard. So just to say, I'm not poo-pooing the idea of it actually causing disease.
All right. And I had noticed a question in the chat, or a comment I had missed when we were talking earlier about crepe myrtle, about that someone had found that they were self-seeding in their yard, and that is true. Crepe myrtles will self-seed, but they haven't yet become an issue with self-seeding beyond the landscape area, or coming up in natural areas, or showing the ability to establish and overtake native vegetation. But you know, it can take time for plants to show invasive tendencies, but typically when we talk about something being invasive, that's what we're talking about, that ability to overtake natural communities and replace them, displace them, whereas something that just will self-seed around the landscape is just more from a weedy plant, can have some weedy tendencies to come up in human disturbed areas. And the other thing with crepe myrtles, I think I mentioned, is you can get some suckers from the base and sometimes some root sprouts as well. All right. Well, it looks like we are ready to wrap up our 2021 season of Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. We so greatly appreciate you all being with us today and throughout the season, and wish you all the best until we meet again. Our 2022 season will begin February 22nd, so hopefully that should be an easy one to remember, February 22, 422. And as I mentioned before, we will have that evaluation survey coming out very soon, so we would love to hear your feedback, and we really would especially appreciate your suggestions for next year, what you'd like to see and hear. So thank you all. Many, many thanks to Matt and Mike. It's been a wonderful season. Much appreciation to Caroline for her support and all she's done to help with plants, pests, and pathogens. And everyone can check out our recordings and catch up on anything you missed by going to our playlist on YouTube, or going to our go.ncsu.edu/PPP, which has our schedule and archive. And that's where you'll find the 2022 schedule when it is ready and posted.
And thank
So
you, Charlotte,
everybody,
for all you do. And thanks for organizing and keeping us in line and all that stuff.
Right, and this this plant this not that series has been really good.
Yeah, I'm getting
Right.
ideas. Yeah, and everyone have a great winter and holiday season. And we'll see you when things start to warm up a little bit next year. And as always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about anything.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And it has been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure working with everybody this year and seeing you all.
Thank you so much. It was very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Seems like a split in image of this father Mark.
All right. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.